come to get all the information on running more efficient, more profitable, more wonderful cafes, and we're getting information from the experts at the source. Now, this area here is brought to you by Bean Scene Magazine and Audimentum. They've made all of this possible, so big thank you to them. By way of introduction, I'm not a barista, I'm not a cafe owner, I'm a journalist who's been writing about them for a long time. I've been reviewing restaurants and cafes for the last 15 or 20 years, and now I run a content agency helping them tell their own stories, and which is all about the people, which is what we're going to be talking about today. It's all about attracting the right talent and keeping them. Very quickly, because we're gathering here like people have on the Yarra River for many, many thousands of years, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and thank them for anyone who is here who's a traditional owner of this land or any other land. And which brings me to our own little meeting place here. I'd like to introduce these two gentlemen. We're really very, very lucky to have them here. First of all, Leon Kennedy, who is the CEO of the Mulberry Group. Now, anyone who has been in cafes in Melbourne will know that the Mulberry Group has basically changed the face of cafes in Melbourne with some of the biggest cafe names there are. It continues to evolve right down to having its own farm down the other side of Geelong, growing its own produce. It's doing all of the things that put it right at the cutting edge of the cafe business. Leon has been running businesses since he was 22 years old, which is why as CEO of a massive, he's not actually a uni student, he has actually been doing it for a very long time, and he's got some great wisdom that he'll be able to share with us today. Next to him is Kai Ogura from Market Lane Coffee. Kai has a fantastic title, I love this, the Front of House Culture Manager. Now, is that something that would have existed in the past? Like, this is something looking after the culture of front of house. Has that ever happened before? I'm sorry if that was me making those extra noises. But it is happening now, and if you don't look after the culture of your front of house, you'll all of a sudden have yourself a very sick business. So before we start with the information...
I think a lot of people don't get their recruitment processes right, and then you kind of end up with people that aren't necessarily suited to what you're trying to do. When I say trying to do, not practically, not like, oh, they're not good at making coffee or they're not good at cooking food. It's that they're not aligned with what you're actually trying to do, which is something probably a bit more philosophical than that. There's probably, some type of purpose or mission that's driving, what you are actually trying to do. And if you can't get people to align with that, then retention is kind of not even really the point. Tell
our cafe crowd here, what are the businesses that Mulberry has at the moment?
So Mulberry, we've got quite a few. We've got Liminal Cafe, we've got Heidi Kitchen, we've got Square One Rialto. Then we've also got Hazel, which is an awesome restaurant in the city. We've got Dessous, we've got Lilac Wine. Then Square One is also a coffee roastery. And then we also have a farm in Freshwater Creek, which also has a cafe on it. So a bit going on. A few openings soon too.
Has it been a conscious decision to cover off a lot of different bases within the industry so that they all sort of gel together?
Do you mean like geographically or just in terms of like
having,
echelon?
You've got a wine bar opening in Abbotsford soon. You've got a farm and cafe supplying produce to all of your businesses.
No, I wish I could say it's been a lot more strategic than it has been, but ultimately what we're always motivated by is a desire to create positive impact. And the farm that we operate is a not-for-profit farm. It really just focuses on regenerative agriculture and supporting the communities around us. So we do that through really extensive work with asylum seekers. We run a program called Staying Grounded where women that are refugees can come and work with us at the farm, and over the course of a program we can really focus on helping with assimilation. And we usually find like around 8 out of 10 women that come and work with us end up getting full-time employment. So everything that we're doing at the farm is why we exist, and I would therefore say the venues play a really important part of supporting the farm, because 10% of net profit from all of our venues and all of our revenue gets donated to the farm so it can do what it does. So it sounds a little bit mechanical, but we're probably more motivated by, when we look at potential opportunities for the group, we're probably more motivated by like, what is the potential of this deal to have an impact for the farm? How do we get it to donate as much as possible? And if it's a cafe, cool. If it's a restaurant, like, no problem.
Do you think that those, first question, part of the question, that those ethics that, wanting to give back, help asylum seekers, that helps attract staff?
Oh,
and then once they're in, do they actually play a role and do some volunteer work down at the farm as well?
Yeah, so we allow all of our staff to work paid down at the farm for a certain amount of time per year. And I can guarantee you that, we wouldn't be able to attract the staff that we attract if we weren't so clear about our mission. Because as soon as we can state that, and we state it early, like I'm talking before the first interview, it's in the job ad, and then when we sit down in the job interview, we start with that. Because it's really, I would say, telling. You can find out very quickly whether people really care about that or not, and maybe some evidence I can provide as to the value it creates is we've quite frequently had people that have studied environmental science, right, and people that have, truth be told, walked away from VM or management positions in other organisations, frankly, on more money because they want to be able to have a bigger impact. So, even outside of your own place of employment, when you look at things economically and you look at things commercially, whether you care about sustainability and the environment or not is kind of irrelevant because your customers do, right? When you actually look at segments of customers that are really kind of growing quickly, you just cannot ignore the rapidly growing demographic of people that are socially conscious. It is everywhere, right? And really, if you think about it, your staff are a little subset of what the public are. They're all consumers as well. So I think if you can actually, speak to that and have something that's quite compelling there, then it's equally true of, what is attractive to your staff.
And it's equally relevant for big groups and small businesses.
100%. It doesn't matter whether you're one business that employs 4 people or a group that employs 400. It's like that mission has to be clear. Otherwise, how's anyone really meant to get you and then portray what you're trying to do to the public?
Now, you started as a business owner very young. Did you follow those rules then? Like where you actually, where it was all from the heart?
Nah, definitely not. I mean, my first business when I was 22, I didn't have a clue what the fuck I was doing. And I was very fortunate that my first business was in the South Melbourne market. So that's a very community-driven, very, it's almost like a family there. And you basically get to have exposure into a few hundred other business owners and you're just going to talk shop all day. So I had a lot of guidance and support, and I was probably young enough and foolish enough where I didn't appreciate it and take it. So the only thing I heard from all their advice in my first 6 months was you can't make money in your first year, and that just was challenge accepted.
Their internships or whatever, and I was like, I'm not ready for that yet. I saw this ad for a shop manager role at Market Lane, and I was like, yeah, I've heard good things. I'll apply. Probably won't get the job. Lo and behold, I did get the job, and it's probably, the luckiest thing of my entire life so far. Spent 5 years managing the shop down at Paran Market, getting to really know our community down there, and like Leon's saying, community is such a massive, massive part of why people are in hospitality, to build those communities around the venues that they work in, but also the communities within the shop, so the community of the team. And we were really lucky that we had really great retention of our team throughout my period there, and I just loved working with the people that I got to see every day, loved serving the people that I loved, that I was serving every day. And then from there just started taking on little bits of more responsibility, doing the rostering, doing some invoicing and accounting work, and then
Where had you seen yourself before you got into coffee?
Anywhere, really, yeah.
You didn't have an idea of where you wanted to be out of your degree?
No, I don't think so. I mean, when I joined Market Lane, it was the classic, I'm going to get into roasting and I'm going to go into green coffee and travel the world and see all these amazing producers, and that was definitely the dream going into Market Lane. But now my dream is just, it's very different. It's more people focused, but locally.
Yeah, so speaking of which, we'll have a lot of people in the crowd here who have small businesses or are looking to start or expand on their business. What advice can you give to them for the 10 outlets of Market Lane that you're looking at over from an HR perspective? How are you getting the right people and how are you keeping them?
Yeah, I think like Leon was saying, like just really like nutting down on those values, those key values of the business from really early on. So if I focus on how we do front of house recruitment, we send out a bunch of screening questions when people sort of email in, and we're don't get me wrong, we're incredibly lucky that we very rarely have to advertise for barista or shop manager roles. We always have this rolling sort of application process and an inbox where people just send through applications, and that's incredibly lucky because that's...
What sort of questions do you ask?
So the top two questions are, why have you chosen to want to work at Market Lane? And the answers there really vary from really coffee-focused people to more sort of sustainability-focused people, or people who have come to us as regular customers for many years. And then the second question is more aimed at why or what two factors do you think are the most important in hospitality or customer service? I think we're incredibly lucky that we have the resources to be able to spend on training, but where a lot of businesses, I think, tend to fall, it's understandable, but you try and look for people with prior coffee making experience or barista experience. Coffee making and barista work is very technical, but the skill that you need in hospitality, a fraction of it can be taught, but a lot of it is intuition based. And so finding people who genuinely like interacting and talking, just talking all day is of great benefit for us.
So how do you screen that?
So during those screening questions, you sort of look at the answers and people who not necessarily derive their energy from talking to people, but people who do enjoy a bit of a yarn. That's a big tick. And then during the interview process, I guess how they're just interacting with us during that interview, how open they are, if they're quite reserved. And then, of course, in hospitality work, the glorious thing is that you can offer a trial shift and then you see them in real life, in action, how they're interacting with our community, and then you sort of go from there.
Can I jump in on that?
Please.
So to go somewhere a little bit more philosophical at the expense, with the risk of opening up a little can of worms, so I'll try to keep it succinct. Just rein me in if you have to.
It's actually my job to rein them in if they start to rave on too long, so don't worry.
Yeah, I think just the advice I'd give people, I think what you need to understand as a business owner is you're not recruiting employees, you're recruiting people. And from people and culture, it's literally in the freaking title of the department, right? It is, if you want to understand how to find the right people, you should probably do some research into what makes people tick, not just employees. Because that second part, the employee side of it, those are just the hygiene factors that you should just have that shit running in your business all the time if you're doing things from a best practice perspective, because that information's not even hard to find, right? It's everywhere, right? Fair Work just give it to you on a silver platter. And Fair Work isn't filled with a bunch of Muppet politicians that have never worked in hospitality before. These are some of the best economists that we have in the country that are using economics and comparing to the best practices of every other economy in the world to determine what is the best way to preserve the incredible standard of living that we have here, right? So if you look at what Fair Work tell you to do and you can't figure it out, that is not their problem, right? That's probably something you need to restructure. But that's all related to employee relations, right? Before you even get to that point, if you want to think about how should I actually attract and retain the right people, then you have to spend a bit of time understanding how people work. And I'm not saying you need to go do a course in psychology. I mean, you can read some of the most rudimentary articles about this stuff. You look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You go and read a book called Love and Work by a guy named Marcus Buckingham who does everything according to statistics, right? And everything will show you that what people care most about more than anything else is the opportunity to grow and develop. Okay, it's the ability to have connection. It's the ability to have impact. Okay, so before you start trying to find employees, you should start by getting a sense of what's the criteria that I need for people that fit that brief in alignment with what my business mission is.
Then how do you, it's great to have these kinds of vibes, especially when you have brands like you guys have behind you.
Sure.
Because you ultimately attract the right people. If you've got a little shopping strip cafe and you don't have the same cut through, how do you find those values within yourself first, and then, what is it that puts it out to the universe to attract those people?
So
like if you go grind down to a small business.
I mean, I don't think it matters how big the business is. I think it doesn't matter whether you're talking about one marginal unit or you're talking about a huge organisation of thousands of people. It's the same thing, right? And I think what happens is, like, to maybe the first part of your question is, how do you, portray the values?
Yeah, coming to those values is a massive development in your business in itself, right?
But I would argue that those things needed to be done before you even raised any money. Like if you don't have that stuff in your pitch deck, you're putting the cart before the horse. And that's not to say if you're already in business and you haven't done that shit that you should be worried. Let's go back and fix it. It doesn't take long. It's not a process of like designing and creating and writing the values. Values need to be discovered, not created. So it's actually just through a process of reflection that you can actually understand what your values are. I'll give you the simplest exercise in the world, right? Just go grab a beer somewhere or go grab a glass of wine, get a blank sheet of paper. Or a coffee. I think alcohol works a little better. But sit down with a blank sheet of paper, okay, and just ask yourself, from the moment you started this business, all right, or from the moment you entered down this career path, okay, just go back chronologically and try to identify the 3 to 5 most defining moments that you've had in your career or in your business. It's actually a really fun exercise.
The stuff that lights you up.
Yeah, and you know what? Some of them will be good, some of them will be bad, but just take the ones that are the most extreme and note them, okay? And think about them from the view that you need to tell it as a story. All right, then grab a mate, right? Or grab someone you know, or if you don't know anyone that you trust with this shit, hit me up. and
tell... He does mentor a lot of people, this man.
So you just you share the stories, right? Because you can't get perspective on those stories because you're in them, right? You lived them. But if you tell them to someone, they'll notice the things that you can't quite see. And I can promise you, between those 3 to 5 stories, there's some stitching, and that's the good stuff. That's the stuff that you're just doing without even thinking about it. But that's where your values live. That's where your purpose lives. And it's a process of just like refinement and reflection to get there.
Yeah, and I think it's to say that even if you do that once, those values aren't set in stone forever. Even at Market Lane, we're constantly reevaluating our values. And with respect to people management and HR culture, it is just a constant thing where we're going back to our values and looking at how those impact the way we are treating our people. And it never stands still. We have an employee handbook that each employee gets at the start of their employment, and that's an ever-evolving document. The one that I got when I started at Market Lane 7 years ago was paper thin compared to what we have now, and it's a living, breathing document, and so are our values.
So what are the values that you think that Market Lane has that really cuts through with prospective employees?
It really depends from person to person. Sustainability is a massive one for us, and one that we're putting a lot of energy into at the moment. Positive impacts in the community, whether it be at home or with our producing partners overseas. That's a really massive one for a lot of people as well. Again, we're incredibly lucky that our sister company is Melbourne Coffee Merchants, so we have just an amazing, never-ending production line of information that we can delve into, and resources for the team to be able to continuously learn and engage with to further their progression in coffee. So that's a massive selling point for us.
And you're a living example of what's possible, I suppose, if you want to join the company.
Yeah.
As a barista.
I think what I'd add to that is you need to be really clear about what are your values and what are your brand promises, because these are different concepts. So just to use your example there, like sustainability is hard, like to me that's a brand promise. Like a value is a behaviour, okay, and a brand promise is something that I can promise and something that I can deliver on. You know, so if you actually think about that, right, you're not just getting people to align with your values. It's bigger than that. They've got to align with your purpose, which is the reason your brand exists. They've got to align with your values, which are the behaviours that will enable success. And they also have to align with your brand promises, which is effectively your strategic competitive advantage or point of difference, unique selling proposition, like whatever you call it. You know, that's the bit that really matters, because not everyone cares about sustainability. But if I was going to go and find a job as a barista, I'd be going straight to these guys because they do it better than anyone. Okay, but one thing I think is important to note is with values is values, so theoretically, I know like what Kai said is really true, that your values can sort of evolve and be changing. The actual like science of it, so the literature says that values don't change. Yeah, they say that values are something for a human being, that they coalesce in your system effectively when you hit your sort of 20s, and then they never change, right? But and an organisation is no different. But what does change is your ability to articulate them. Okay, so one thing that's really important, because I would hope that a bunch of you guys go home and start to think about, fuck, what are my values, right? And as you start to think about that, you don't have to nail it, right? You just have to come up with stuff that resonates, stuff that kind of gives you a few goosebumps or something. And then what is actually really important...
Can you give us some examples of your values?
Yeah, I can. Let me just finish this bit. So once you actually get a sense of like what are the things that are meaningful, the most important thing is to go and stress test them. Okay, actually go and live them. Go test ride them. Go and actually see. So I'll give you an example directly, right? So when I started at the Mulberry Group, we invested a lot of time in this area. Because from my perspective, my role is there to provide strategy for the organisation. It's impossible to provide strategy if we don't know why we exist. So we spent a lot of time talking about this, and we decided on what our values were in a really long session where we took the leadership team off site. And for what it's worth, our values are passion, authenticity, connection, and empathy. Now, those 4 words, right, to everyone here, mean fuck all. Because if you're just going off the Webster's Dictionary, well, that's fine, but that's not how we interpret them.
And they're all a bit cliched too, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're very buzzy, you know. So what you need to have is your own definition directly next to that word. And I could give you guys that definition, but we're going to need more than 20 minutes. But what I'd say, the definition isn't important unless you come and work with us. What's important is how you make sure that those definitions actually land. So what we did was, once we understood that, hey, these are the 4 words, this is how we define them, and we feel pretty good about them, one of the ways that we stress tested that was I basically said, hey, every single leadership team meeting that we have for the next 3 weeks, before we launch this to the company, before we print it anywhere or write it down anywhere, all I'm going to do at the start of the meeting is just randomly pick someone and say, hey, Wendy, where have you seen authenticity in the last 24 hours? And if you're like, oh, shit, I think I've kind of seen it, it's probably not the right word, right? Because your values need to be something that exists, right? It's not just something you espouse. It has to be the stuff that is actually in use. So a lot of organisations try to create values, like they'll say, you know what, our number 1 value is best practice. But really, the thing they care most about is innovation. Now, those 2 things are contradicting ideals, right? So if I go work somewhere and they tell me that best practice is their number 1 value, I'm not going to see it anywhere. So that's an example of the value you espouse not being like evident. Now, in that situation, I'm going to go, fuck, well, if they were wrong about that, what else were they wrong about? And what they say in culture studies is that...
Which isn't very authentic.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, if you have a gap between the values you espouse and the values you have in use, all the culture slips through that gap. So you really want to stress test it. So if you actually stress test best practice and you go, oh, it's actually nowhere, because what we actually care about is figuring out best practice and then disrupting it and creating creativity and innovation, pick that.
Yeah.
You know, because once you pick that word, you should be able to see it everywhere. You shouldn't be able, like at the Mulberry Group, you can't walk 10 metres without bumping into someone who's going to be passionate about service or drinks or food or spreadsheets if you meet one of the accountants.
So you guys are incredibly fortunate to have the cream the crema of the people applying to you. Put yourselves in the shoes of people who don't have the brand awareness. They've got their kick-ass values sorted. They're articulating themselves. They're great with their mates. They're important people in their lives. They've got people coming through the door to apply. They might be people with zero skills that need to be trained up. How do you see, like you can see what the reaction is to the value proposition, but how do you cut through and find that person who has that hospitality gene where, you know, they're actually able to have a conversation and look people in the eye and ask if people are okay?
I'll just jump in real quick. I think, so before I answer that, I just want to correct one thing. I don't know that we do get the cream of the crop, because you could argue that the best talent are going to go to the best salaries. And one of the downsides of being a positive impact business that cares a lot about a not-for-profit organisation is we can't compete with those salaries. You know, and so in a way you could sort of argue that we have to find people that aren't necessarily in roles they've been doing for 4 years that kind of demand the highest top end of the range in that sector of the industry. We're probably having to find people that haven't got the experience but they've got the desire.
Yep.
And then we have to put the right architecture around them to support them on their journey. So I just want to point that out.
And how do you spot the bullshitters? You know, oh yeah, I'm so into this, I'm so into that, just to get the foot in the door.
Yeah, so I guess the answer I'd give you to that is you have to do it diagnostically. So I think you, first and foremost, if you're going into any part of a recruitment process without some kind of template, you are asking for trouble, right? And it doesn't matter whether you know them or not, right? It's like that's what a template does. And even if it's just as basic as something you download from Google or you get ChatGPT to do it, fine. But
Can you give us an example of a simple template?
Like actually what the questions would be? Yeah.
Oh, like, you know, or is it as simple as boundaries? It's like, we'll not go there.
I think what it comes down, all of that, you know, and I think you need to have stuff that's going to, my advice would be start with something very basic, try it, okay, and then every time you use it, just take 5 minutes and do a quick little retro on it. And go, what worked, what didn't work? Or every time you have an employee that has a bit of friction or leaves you or something, go back to your template and go, what could I have evolved in my template that could have negated or, you know, mitigated this risk? I think so.
Yeah, and I think, I think if people leave on good terms, and you always want to try and do some research, if you can do an exit interview, that's a great place that you can learn. Something that we do is we send out an annual survey to the team, and we pay them for 15 minutes of their time. And, you know, some people, it's a really simple survey. Some people take 2 minutes to complete it. Some people might take 30. But yeah, it's completely anonymous. You know, basically just asks, you know, would you recommend Market Lane as a place to work, to friends? I can be my whole and authentic self at work, rate on a scale of 1 to 5, you know, things like that at the end of every year. And basically, when we do a review of the answers that come in from that, from all, you know, 80 or 90 staff, that really quickly becomes the blueprint for us for the next 12 or sometimes even longer months, that we can really sort of, we're getting that real-time data of how people are feeling when they come to work for us. Sometimes some people can feel not that great, and we go, okay, well, why is that? Is it the way that we communicate internally? Is it the way that we're onboarding people? Is it the way that our managers are supporting people once they're into the cafes?
Is that anonymous, or do you know who's
what? Completely anonymous. Yep.
Is there a place for surveys where they can actually vent and be identified?
Yeah, there's places for that as well, and then there's also just a rolling anonymous feedback form that we have throughout the year that anyone can submit anything into. So it might be like, I worked at this shop and I noticed that there's never paper towels in the toilet. It could be something as small as that, or it could be something a lot deeper culturally. I can't think of one now, but yeah.
So no matter the size of the business, you would recommend like downloading SurveyMonkey and actually...
Absolutely, yeah. I think giving opportunity to the team to be able to give feedback and not feel like there's going to be some sort of retribution on them, I think is massively important. Hospitality as an industry has traditionally been one where people get treated like shit if they give some constructive or, let's say, honest, feedback. But yeah, and people rightfully feel scared about that. So giving them an opportunity to be able to vent a little honestly, then yeah, it's great.
So what other techniques, strategies do you employ to keep your gun staff engaged and wanting to keep going?
Definitely goes back to what Leon was saying earlier, but just treating people like people. One thing that we have now is we have like a fund that people can dip into, $400 a year as part of our overall mental health policy, but $400 a year where they can tap into and that can cover, gap payments for mental health services. No questions asked. All they need to do is send us a receipt. Doesn't have to. We don't want an itemised tax receipt. It can just be a little FPOS, customer copy of a receipt, and we'll reimburse them for the money that they spend doing that. But yeah, just looking after people as people.
Has that been taken up well by staff?
It has been, yeah, definitely.
So an understanding of mental health is clearly an important part of the role, right?
Definitely. I think young people will always have their ups and downs. Well, I mean, people in general will always have their ups and downs with their mental health or their physical health or just life problems, Like, I think one of the really big things from before I started at Market Lane that the three owners decided was that we were wanting to be an employer that was flexible with people throughout their entire, sort of life cycle or journey with us. And so one of the massive things that we chose to do early was to do all of the HR for all venues centralised. So all of the hiring, the recruitment, the training, the rostering, it's all done by a team of three of us at Market Lane. And so, we just want to be with people for as long as possible if they're great. We have people who have been shop managers who've wanted to take a step back and go back to just being a barista, then go back to uni, then they finish their uni degree and they're like, oh, actually, I do want to work full-time again. They start working full-time. And, those people have been with us for 7 or 8 years, and it's just wonderful because we can keep our relationship with those incredible people.
The way you guys are talking, it feels like a whole other world to the hospitality industry that I was writing about pre-lockdown. And I wrote a lot of stories about big-name chefs getting themselves in hot water, and big venues getting themselves in hot water for doing the wrong thing. And some of them, of course, were absolute scapegoats, and it was a terrible situation. But it's really the employee's game now, isn't it? Like, they really do call the shots.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know what you're saying. I think saying that, like, they call the shots is a little unfair. And the reason I say that is because I think if you look at it that way, you're instantly limiting the relationship or the potential.
And making it confrontational.
Yeah.
But it exists out there. You have to accept that there are people who go into a job almost with their armour up, and it's like, how can I?
Hey, but again, right, it comes back to alignment. So if that's the sort of culture that you are running with, then they'll be a good fit for you. If that's not the type of culture and that's not the mission that you have, then you should be able to weed that out pretty early on in the recruitment stage.
Yep.
I think another thing that's just really important to note, right? Like, so let's just assume you've got some pretty good systems for attracting and recruiting the right people. The second thing about how do you retain them, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. You can't just look at this really diverse group of people. When I say diverse, I don't mean a huge amount. You could have 3 people in your employment and there's still a lot of diversity there. But you can't just look at everyone and go, oh, everyone's going to be the same. Right? The first way that I think is important to segment and fragment things out is to look at it from the perspective of how should you approach people in leadership positions and how should you approach people that aren't in leadership positions. Because people that aren't in leadership positions, again, you look at all the data, right? And you look at all the literature and it will tell you the thing that they want to feel more than anything is heard. Seen, connected. And it's so often that you're just doing all this stuff as a founder, as a business owner, you just don't even think about the fact that some of that detail is the stuff that they would really appreciate. even if you just take an hour on a Friday afternoon to send out an email to everyone, just be like, hey everyone, a few things that have happened this week, and you might think it sounds really mundane, but everyone in your organisation is probably going to really appreciate that because people want to feel like they're kept in the loop. Okay, so when it comes to your leadership positions, that's a probably slightly different approach. And I think one thing that you have to really understand with people in leadership is the thing that matters more than anything is a sense of identity, right? Because you sort of set the stage when you articulate your mission, right? You make it really clear, this is the environment that you're going to be operating in. But within that environment, people need to find their own identity to fit in there, right? And why that's really hard for business owners is because sometimes right, that the solution to this problem is clear to you. And if you were solving it yourself, it would get fixed exactly as you expected. But you actually have to step aside from that, right? And you have to delay that benefit to allow someone else to have a go at it who's probably going to mess it up, or they might not do it as optimally as what you can. But you have to kind of delay that gratification and say, hey, I'm going to give this person the opportunity to do it their way. And it might be different to the way I would do it, and it might be a bit suboptimal in the moment, but eventually, if they're doing it motivated by identity that aligns with your mission, they're going to do it better than you. And my experience, no matter how reluctantly I've ever let go of those decisions in the past, and I can tell you, I can say this because I've learned it the hard way many, many times, is on balance, it always ends up a net positive result for everyone.
How do you let go of the control freak, though? Anyone who runs their own business is a natural control freak.
Well, that's on you, It is. It's like you just have to learn how to deal with that. Or you have to be comfortable with the decision you make. All right, you're either going to deal with your own shit and figure out a way to reconcile that for the greater good of your organisation, or you have to settle for an organisation that will be smaller in its size of scale.
So now you can see why these gentlemen are in charge of big groups, right? Like there's so many nuggets in here. But look, we've got a couple of minutes left if you guys have questions, and we can still keep yakking while you think about it. But if you've got any questions you'd specifically like to ask the guys, it doesn't have to be about attracting and retaining staff. If there's something that caught your interest through the show, please do. Just pop your hand up. We've got a microphone. Oh, we've got one here. Thank you, Chloe.
Hello, it's Karen Monaghan from Our Kinds. What I'd love to know, I love, Leon, that you mentioned that customers are interested in sustainability and employees are customers too. They're one and the same population. What's the number one thing that they would like to see you address right now in terms of sustainability?
Oh, that is such a good question. I don't know that it would be one thing. I think there's so many things that we need to do better as a society, and even that's quite murky. Like, no one's really developed the perfect strategy, right? I remember the first time I read Donut Economics, and I was like, holy crap, this is unbelievable. But, 3 years on, a lot of economies that have tried to implement that have had varying degrees of success. So, without, if there's no macro strategy that everyone can agree on, how do you determine that in a micro sense? I think what I could probably say that's pertinent to us, albeit not at all a representative sample size, is, and again, this is anecdotal, I think that the thing people want more than anything is tangibility. So I'll give you a quick example of that. We make it really clear, right? So one of our biggest brand promises is that every one of our customers can be part of positive impact because we donate 10% of our net profit to the farm. So it doesn't matter whether you come in and drink one glass of wine or whether you do the entire chef's menu, you're a part of it, right? That's a brand promise I can promise the public, and I will never, ever under-deliver on that no matter what. Okay, now what's crazy though is at a time when I was pitching our slide deck to investors and board members, there were employees working in our businesses that didn't even know that, right? Because we'd spent so much time creating these amazing stories, we hadn't really thought about how to share them, And so going back to your, staff and customers being the same, all right, I spent ages trying to figure out, okay, how do we get this across, people? How do we get this to be front of mind for people? And my first way to do that was to take that slide deck on the road. We went to every venue, got the whole team together, and I delivered it personally. And it's like, but when you're talking about 200 people, that's not going to last very long. There's going to be turnover, people forget. And I know that when I send out an email to the entire organisation, I'd love to think everyone's reading it and engaging with it. I'll probably get one response back. So it's hard for us to find things and platforms in the organisation that will drive and capture the attention of everyone that works in our organisation. But the one thing that they're looking at, whether I like it or not, is our social media, right? And so when you actually look at our social media content, we're like, hang on, they're all watching that anyway.
Let's not put pretty pictures of food and coffee up. Let's
Yeah,
put our
just put the
values
mission
up.
there,
Yeah.
you know, because then we've got content that's actually inducting our customers and our staff.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so it's really important. So again, just a super granular example of that is, you know, when we talk about like 10% of net profit gets donated to the farm, that is fairly clear, but the mechanics of it aren't very clear. Like, what does that mean, right? Like, when is that money going there, and how does it show up?
Is that just paying for your ingredients?
Yeah, what if you don't do any profit?
Yeah.
Like, does that mean the farm don't get money? You know, and so what we've done, right, to create tangibility around this, and this is very new, so we're yet to get everyone aware of this and educated on it. But one of the things we do in our cash flow is we make sure that as soon as we understand what our revenue is for the week, we take out our projected net profit from that and we pay the farm before we pay anyone else. Right, so we don't get our revenue and then pay staff and suppliers and tax and provisions and you name it, and then whatever profit's left, we break a piece off for the farm. The farm get paid first before anyone else. And then that makes us really accountable. That says, hey, you know what, we project our net profit to be 10%. So once we've paid that forward, if we then don't go out and achieve that 10%, cash flow becomes really difficult for our managers, right, and everyone else. So it gives people something to galvanise around. So
A bit of incentive there
yeah,
too, right?
exactly.
Now, on the question of sustainability, though, at 2 o'clock, we've got a great session on how doing good can actually increase your profits right here. Are there any other questions? Yes. Orlando Marzo from Law Cocktails. Lore. Sorry, I'm not Italian. It's Loro. Sorry, Orlando.
That's okay. It's Loro, for those who don't know. A question for both. We spoke about recruiting and retaining, particularly the value of the business, which is normally driven by leaders in the business. But on a day-to-day or a monthly operation, what does your team do for their career? Like, if I come as a junior barista or a junior sommelier or front of house, what kind of training do you offer fortnightly or monthly?
So with all of our shops, each shop has a shop manager, and they're essentially their main task or their main part of their role is to look after the training, the development, and guide the rest of our front of house team. So sort of day-to-day training is done by the shop managers. We've also got 2 full-time people working in our training department. So they often float around from venue to venue and they'll look at sort of the rosters going into the week going, okay, I can, you know, my best bet is to go to our CBD location and work there because there's 2 brand new baristas there and I'll spend 3 hours with each of them doing technical skills. And then from there, we also have monthly training sessions, and they might be things like, I think this month we're doing a tea tasting. We've done anything from, you know, whiskey, wine tastings to sessions with acting coaches talking about body language and how we use body language in customer service.
Can I come to that?
Yeah, that was a great session. A lot of role play, so you had to be comfortable with the role playing. But yeah, so there's a lot going on.
Fantastic.
For us, it's a complex question because I think the answer is I'm yet to see a great reliable solution. So one of the things that I was really fortunate to be able to do in my career was to work on a project with LinkedIn, and I worked with their C-suite at their HQ in New York, and what they were trying to achieve was how do they do exactly what you just said, right? But very specifically, how do we provide education for people around our products and whatnot with the intention that it can really help with, you know, the organisation as a whole. So I got to do all this research, right? One of the parts of this project was to research everything in the industry and try to identify which organisations have done what they call best-in-class learning. And so I was really fortunate. I got to speak to Hawthorn Football Club and all sorts of elite organisations to try to determine what people were doing. And where our research took us was all roads led back to one word, and that word was academy. Okay? And what you really needed to achieve was all the information had to be accessible for people that had different learning needs. Right? So I could write, a 50-page handbook and give it to you. Maybe you, knowing what I know about you, Orlando, you'd probably read every word on it and study it and pass the test afterwards. Yeah, but if you're someone like me, you wouldn't even get 3 sentences in before you start tuning out. So, you need to be able to make sure that the information is accessible. What we've realised is that digital seems to be one of the best bases for that. But then you also need to be able to have an additional touch point for people to say, cool, say I work in the same organisation as Orlando, I can watch the video where, one of the best bartenders on the planet teaches me how to make an old fashioned.
And he did win World Cocktail Maker. What year was that, Orlando? Anyone need cocktail tips? You need to go to Orlando. He's a world champion in making cocktails.
I just meant world in my opinion. So basically, I think you need to be able to create those touch points to go, okay, cool, I can watch the video of the guy, but there should also be something that's happening in 3 months where he's going to do that in person for a few people. So I guess like in an idealistic way, having that sort of infrastructure is incredible, but probably not super realistic. What we're trying to work out right now is how do we make that a more realistic opportunity. And you know what, as we've started to look into that, then there's apps and software and there's things that exist right now that you can very quickly create digital learning academies on that don't require a ton of elbow grease, especially if you're just doing it with rough and ready videos and whatnot. It's just about actually providing the elbow grease to get these things up and running and then seeing how quick they can grow.
In time. I suppose it all comes back to the very first topic, which is they're not employees, they're people.
100%.
And bringing it all back to what people need to live a good life, right?
Yeah, for sure.
These guys, honestly, my brain has been exploding, and I love the way you challenge me, Leon. I've been trying to speak for people who are in small business because I'm interviewing people who are in big business, and sometimes it seemed to be easier for them, right? Because they've got, scale, but scale creates its own headaches as well, and it seems it's quite obvious that you all have the same issues. And sitting down like this in environments like this where people can be vulnerable and actually say, yeah, this is a real problem, I think it's groundbreaking stuff. So thank you so much for sharing. It's been amazing.
No worries. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I said before, back at 2 p.m, we've got an amazing panel back here on how doing good drives cafe